Well, it wasn't a totally boring race. McLaren 1-2 all the way. Lando Norris always had that race in control, despite, I guess, there were a few panic attacks amongst various commentators around the world in the closing laps. But to my eye, Lando always had that race sewn up. He was driving at the slowest possible speed, saving the car, looking after it. He had a slight damage on the front wing, which was upsetting the balance a little bit. Traffic and everything is a big deal around Austria because the lap is so short, but you do have the benefit of very good blues and GPS these days, so none of that was really an issue. And Lando just superb in every respect, I thought. Very, very good off the line. I guess the only mistake he really made, if he wanted to be very critical of Lando, the only thing he did was overblock Charles Leclerc into turn 1, which effectively then gave a free pass to Oscar Piastri to get into P2 around the outside of Charles on the exit of turn 1. And from Lando's point of view, you would have thought it would be much better to have Charles behind him in the opening stages than Oscar Piastri. It was pretty close in the early laps, but it was Oscar that made mistakes because of DRS, which made the race less exciting than it could have been, obviously. But because of DRS, Oscar found himself all over Lando on various situations. Once on lap 11, Oscar was so close that he got inside him going into turn 2, but Lando, very, very cool, just moved back to the inside and repassed him on DRS into 4. And then a few laps later, Oscar made a big mistake trying to get in. I don't know what he was doing. I'm sure he wasn't actually trying to pass Lando going into 4, but having locked up the brakes slightly on lap 11 when he was giving the position back to Lando, he then massively locked up going into the corner I was talking about yesterday. It used to be the Bosch curve, turn 4. And wow, that flat spotted the tyres and kind of threw him out a little bit, I think, in terms of potentially going to win the race. Then McLaren faffed around a little bit in terms of how long they would keep Oscar out once Lando had made his pit stop. And that didn't earn him any time either. In fact, he lost time doing that. So the second time around, it was a 2-stop race. Second time around, they brought him in just after Lando. And of course, with traffic and with Lando taking it easy towards the end, it was no surprise at all to see Oscar drawing closer. But he was never in DRS range. I guess that was the significant thing. And beyond that, there was always traffic there that Lando could use as a bit of a cushion, particularly when the likes of Franco Colapinto and the Alpine just drove Piastri off the straight coming out of turn 2. Piastri, all 4 wheels on the grass. Interesting, this is the first lap after his pit stop, and interestingly, he was only 0.2 slower than Lando on that lap when Lando was fully up to speed. Just shows Oscar stayed absolutely flat on the throttle when he was on the grass. Impressive. I suppose the other thing you could say about Lando, not a great look when you get on the radio to say, where's Oscar quicker? I seem to be slower everywhere. Help me, or something like that. It sounded a little bit, I can't imagine Jackie Stewart or Jochen Rindt or Niki Lauda saying something like that. Anyway, he did. But the answer was, and it was the correct answer, he's going quicker on high-speed corners because that's what he does in that situation. He had everything to gain, not much to lose, and he was going to push it as hard as he could on fast corners. And Oscar's very, very good. Well, I say he's very good. He's very good on fast corners, obviously. He's very confident driving on the rear. Great racing car. Why wouldn't he be? But that was it, and there's no way he was ever going to get within DRS range of Lando in the closing laps, and so it proved, and Lando finally won another Grand Prix. Good on him. He deserved that win, and it will do something for his confidence, I think, going into Silverstone. A circuit I said yesterday he'll be very quick on, but I think his margin will be smaller over Oscar Piastri there. Indeed, I think they'll be very, very even around Silverstone. Piastri will be very quick there, for sure. So that was it. It was a bit of a McLaren infight, clearly trying to point out to the public at large, yes, we're allowing our 2 guys to race. And I suppose there were a few clammy palm moments on the pit wall when they were running relatively closely. But I don't believe the pulse rate of either driver was up particularly high. And I don't think there was any doubt that Lando was going to win this one. He was always in command. Very, very good win for Lando Norris, born of his amazing pace in qualifying yesterday. Oscar didn't get to see how quickly he could have gone on that last lap, had he done so, as I said yesterday. But I don't believe he would have got the pole from Lando. I think that was an exceptional lap from Lando Norris yesterday, and he deserved the win as a result. After that, there was nobody to fight or to race them at all, because Max Verstappen, who might not have beaten the Ferraris, that's for sure, but when Max is out of the race, and it doesn't happen very often, when Max is out of the race, it just feels like the whole balloon is deflated, because not necessarily if you're a Max fan or anything like that, I'm just talking about with Max Verstappen, something is always going to happen. We come across these athletes at various times in various sports in various eras, and Max is one of those guys. So long as he's in the race, something is bound to be going on around him. Anyway, he wasn't there because on the first lap, he made a good start from the clean side of the grid, got past Liam Lawson into turn 1, and he was minding his own business with nobody around him going into 2 on the outside. When steaming down the inside with his brakes locked up, he said it was rear brakes, but by this stage the fronts were locked as well, came the great Kimi Antonelli straight into Max and taking them both out of the race. Now I wonder, I've often talked about these walks they do on Thursday, and I wonder whether on this particular Thursday in Austria, whether Kimi's guys were saying to him as they walked up to turn 2, now Kimi, you need to go home tonight to the hotel and watch a replay of the restart after the safety car of the race in 2002 when Nick Heidfeld completely overestimated his brakes. They weren't up to temperature. He locked up from way back and nearly killed Taku Sato, just T-boned him out of the race. Massive shunt. Remember, this is a tight corner with high-speed braking, and the tyres and the brakes will not be up to temperature, so take it very, very easy. Have a look at that video just as a reminder. I wonder whether that conversation took place. Of course not, because it was a long time ago. Nobody cares. Yet if we don't learn from mistakes, what do we do? And that's exactly what happened with Kimi Antonelli. Obviously, the brakes, the tyres, whatever, weren't up to temperature. He locked up. Oh, I'm really sorry, they locked up. Straight into Max, took him out of the race. And I thought Max was pretty good when he got out of the car. Just, well, that's it. He probably thought it was going to be a fairly miserable race anyway, so I'm not exactly concerned about having to get back in the plane and fly away. But anyway, Kimi out of the race as well. And a black mark for him, for sure, because that is a misjudgment in terms of brake temperatures, tyre temperatures, and should not have happened at that stage on the opening lap of the race. So it was left then to Ferrari, really, to dispute third place, but there was no racing between Charles Leclerc and Lewis Hamilton. It was always Charles well ahead of Lewis with a margin, Lewis finishing comprehensively behind him. At one point on his second pit stop, complaining that he shouldn't have been brought in. And I think he was probably right, because he wasn't going that quickly, and he wasn't using the tyres that much, and I think he probably could have got through to the finish, but Ferrari were just locked into this strategy. It's got to be a 2-stopper. And I have to say here, Pirelli predicted before the race that all cars would have to run 2 stops. Well, guess who didn't run 2-stop strategy? Liam Lawson and Fernando Alonso. We'll get onto them in a minute, but they just ran a 1-stop strategy, picked up track position, and had great results because of that. So I think Lewis is absolutely right to say he didn't want to come in and he should have stayed out. But why, again, is that conversation taking place in the middle of the race? Why aren't they discussing this before the race? What is it that's going on at Ferrari? That, again, what happens if 2/3 distance, when the second pit stop is looming, what happens if the tyres are feeling okay? I mean, I'm on the hard tyres. Why wouldn't we try to do that to gain track position? And why wouldn't they talk about that? I just ask myself the question time and time again, and they don't, obviously, because there's Lewis saying, oh yeah, and he's making the right call on this occasion. I think he should have stayed out. And Ferrari, no, we'll stick to our guns, bring him in. Are they just concerned that putting him on a different strategy might upset Charles Leclerc or something? I mean, I don't know what it is, but there's a lack of communication there still. And I don't know how many times I said this, but Frederick Vasseur, it's his responsibility, and he needs to get on top of that, because a lack of communication between the driver and the engineers is totally controllable and shouldn't be happening anyway. So George Russell it was, in the lone factory Mercedes, who eventually finished 5th. Pretty lonely race for him, not much going on. He said before the race, said after qualifying, we're not surprised that we're not super quick here. The track is very abrasive. I'm still trying to get my head around that. I don't understand why one racing car compared with another type of racing car within the same regulations would be suited more to less abrasive track conditions. I mean, it just doesn't. I've never seen that. I've seen high-speed corners, low-speed corners, traction, whatever. Abrasion, it's just weird. I guess he's talking about tyre management, tyre wear, and they're not getting the best from the tyres. That's all I can imagine in this Pirelli era. But anyway, they went into the race thinking they might be lucky to race with Ferrari, and they weren't lucky, and they didn't race with Ferrari, and George was a distant 5th. And then in P6 came the driver of the day, in my mind, no doubt about that at all. Liam Lawson in the Racing Bulls had Fernando Alonso in his mirrors for I don't know how many laps. On exactly the same strategy. And I can't think of anybody worse than having Fernando in your mirrors, actually. And he just drove beautifully, no errors whatsoever, completely upstaged Isaac Hadjar on this occasion, and eventually finished 6th ahead of Fernando. Incredible drive. by Liam Lawson, and he did so with a one-stop strategy. So the tyres had zero grip and zero feel by the end of the race, but that is exactly the strategy that Lewis Hamilton wanted to be on, and he might have beaten Charles Leclerc as a result. Anyway, to get back to the drive by Liam, just wonderful to watch. He was tidy, he was everything that he hasn't been for the last few races. And if you're looking right now, coming down from 30,000 feet and saying, what do you think about the Red Bull A second driver? And you look at Yuki Tsunoda, who today got the Torpedo Award for hitting both Colapinto and Lance Stroll. And you're looking at Yuki Tsunoda droning around in the race, back of the field, presumably with damage on the car by then. And then you look at what Liam Lawson's doing, and you think, oh, put Liam Lawson in the A team. Of course you would say that. And he just drove incredibly well, I thought, and got the most from that car. More, really, over-delivered with that car. Fernando Alonso, tough fighter that he is, could do nothing about Liam Lawson. Yeah, maybe you could say the Racing Bulls is a quicker car than the Aston Martin, but I think in race conditions, when everybody's a little bit slow, there's bits all over the track, things going on, everybody's got damage, the tyres are coming in, going away. You know, those situations are Fernando's forte, but he couldn't pass Liam Lawson. Incredible. Having said that, Fernando did a very good job in the closing laps to hold off a very fast charging and closing Gabriel Bortoleto, who also drove superbly in the Sauber that Carlos Sainz should be racing this year if he'd been listening to our live streams for over a 3-month period last year saying, do not go to Williams, go to Sauber, it's your only option, Carlos. But no, he went to Williams because they appeared to have the quicker car at the time. Yeah, well, tell us about that now. And Gabriel driving beautifully in the Jonathan Wheatley run team now, just wonderful to watch. And backed up by Nico Hulkenberg, who started from the pit lane, would you believe, and finished right behind Gabriel. So what a result for Sauber. Incredible. What a step they've taken since last year. No doubt noticed by Valtteri Bottas, who's standing around as the third driver in Mercedes now. But the reality is, and I've got to say it again, on a day that Williams were absolutely abysmal and Carlos Sainz didn't even get off the dummy grid because his rear brakes were locked or he was jammed in gear or something, and then the brakes caught fire and he delayed the start. The car delayed the start by 15 minutes. And then Alex Albon was out of the race early as well. Williams, absolutely catastrophically bad. Carlos Sainz could have been in that Sauber. Anyway, the offer was there for him. Nico Hulkenberg, Carlos Sainz is what the team could have been this year. But not taking it away from Gabriel Bortoleto, he's absolutely taking that drive to its full potential and driving beautifully. He's managed by Fernando Alonso, interestingly. And when they got to Parc Ferme, there was Fernando hugging Gabriel. It was good to see that. Both of them had driven really well today in the Austrian Grand Prix. Very good drives too by Esteban Ocon and Oliver Behrman in the Haas Ferraris. 1 point for Esteban. He was very competitive, looked good. Both cars were very good. Didn't get a massive amount of TV time, but they certainly did the job today. Very, very impressive performance from Haas Ferrari. Alongside, you got to say, even Red Bull, let alone Williams Mercedes, or the Flavio Briatore run Alpine team. Now going back to Red Bull, Yuki Tsunoda absolutely nowhere, and this is a very good example of when the number one driver, Max Verstappen, is taken out on the first lap. At least you would hope that the other driver, and it happened quite often with Sergio Perez, would be there or thereabouts somewhere in the major points. But Yuki Tsunoda, as I said before, absolutely hopeless, apart from T-boning two cars and obviously getting damage on his car as a result. As for Max, of course it was not his fault at all. But he would know better than anyone that if you qualify 7th in Austria, there's a very, very good chance you're going to be hit by somebody either at turn 1 or turn 2, probably turn 2 because it's tighter and slower after a big braking area. And that's what happened. That was the penalty for qualifying only 7th. Yes, he had to abort his last lap. No, he wouldn't have been as quick as the McLarens, and he may not have outqualified at least one of the Ferraris. So bad set of circumstances for Max Verstappen, but you can't use the luck word there because Charles Leclerc was on the front row from the time he did in the first run in Q3, and he was much quicker than Max on that first run. So there's the difference. Nothing to do with luck, to do with the pace of the Red Bull Honda in Austria. So that was the Austrian Grand Prix. Another 1-2 for McLaren-Mercedes, and I suppose more than anything this race now means that the world champion is going to be one of those two drivers. I think going into Austria you could still say Max was in sniffing distance, but now he's over 2 wins away on the assumption that neither McLaren driver scores for 2 races, and Max has got to win two wins in that situation and then get a few other placings as well, even to be up with them. So yeah, it's looking very much as if it's going to be Oscar Piastri or Lando Norris. And here, you know, Lando's got momentum now. He'll be going to the British Grand Prix, his home race, and he'll be on top of the world. in a car that's probably one of the nicest Grand Prix cars ever built to drive by a human being. And he'll be loving life, as will Oscar Piastri, of course. He'll be thinking, yeah, if I'd qualified on the front row, if I'd had a better qualifying, if the flags hadn't come out when they had, I definitely had the pace over Lando today. That'll be the way he's thinking. Not sure he's absolutely right there, but that's what he'll be thinking, and he'll be taking that into Silverstone, of course. We close with a slightly different mood. First of all, I'd just like to remember my friend, the great racing driver Mark Donoghue, who lost his life in the 1975 Austrian Grand Prix. 50 years since then on this circuit. Well, almost on this circuit. He went over the hill after the pits, used to go straight on instead of into the tight right. And going into the very, very quick right-hander, a left front tyre blew, and he went off, hit some scaffolding actually. It wasn't a hard barrier, and one of the scaffolding poles hit him on the helmet. And he got an embolism later on and died in Graz Hospital. So I'd just like to remember Mark. This is the tribute I wrote for him, about him, in Autocar at the time. It was a very sad day, and it was at a time in Formula One when you just wondered if it was ever going to stop. I'd also like to remember, and I think everyone will get this, in all the hoopla that's going on at the moment with the 75th anniversary of Formula One and everything that's going on, the movie, everything else, I'd also like to remember, and this is sparked by another of the wonderful REC DNA watchers, a young Australian who was fighting a very different sort of battle. Yes, just a little pocket in time to talk about an unsung hero. We've got so many big stars on the Formula One stage, but there were so many other stars as well. Here's an Aussie, Patterson Hughes, who gave his life at the age of 22 in the Battle of Britain. 17 hits in a Spitfire, chassis number X4009, one of the original Spitfire Mark 1As, very rare. He was the only pilot actually to fly that specific aircraft. It's being restored now in Australia. Here you see the fuselage, but a skin from that aircraft was unusable in the restoration and has been now included as part of the DNA of this latest watch from REC. He died when his parachute failed to open after intercepting a Dornier over London during the Battle of Britain, and he was awarded posthumously the Distinguished Flying Cross, the DFC. Yeah, it puts life into perspective, doesn't it, when you hear stories about aces like that. Anyway, details of that watch and others are in the description below this video, recwatches.com. And a final mention to everybody gathered also in Scotland today and yesterday to celebrate and remember Jim Clark's achievement in 1965 of winning both the Formula One World Championship, which he clinched at the German Grand Prix in August, and in May, obviously on Memorial Day, May the 30th, the Indianapolis 500, all in the same year, the World Championship and the Indy 500. And a huge gathering around Duns Castle in Scotland this weekend. You can see the Lotus 33, Lotus 49, his 67 Indy car, and here's some of his road cars as well, including that gorgeous yellow Elan that he drove throughout Europe in 1967 to many of the Grand Prix. So with that, a big thanks to REC Watches, to Jetcraft, to Track Ninja, and to OEM Exclusive, to you the viewer for watching. We'll be back again next week with our full coverage of the British Grand Prix at Silverstone. See you then.